In 1994, Dr. Helen Horstmann became the fourth woman to serve as president of the American Academy for Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine. Her commitment to serve the Academy extended for more than 2 decades in leadership roles as director, committee member, and chair of both the Continuing Education and Publications Committees. A distinguished orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Horstmann spent the majority of her career at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She specialized in the care of orthopedically handicapped children and adults and is nationally recognized for her work in cerebral palsy, as well as for the care of adults with post-polio syndrome. She has been a leader of the American Women's Orthopedic Group and the Ruth Jackson Orthopedic Society, serving as its president. She is likely best known as co-author of the definitive medical text on cerebral palsy management, Orthopedic Management and Cerebral Palsy, with Stanford professor Eugene Bleck. Though she claims to have retired in 2018, Dr. Horstmann currently serves on the boards of Villanova University and the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society. In 2020 and 2021, she chaired the Philadelphia Flower Show, which in 2021 was held outdoors for the first time in its 192-year history and had over 100,000 visitors. She is a student of gardening, gardens, and photography. Dr. Horstmann and her husband John have 6 grown daughters, and they have 10 grandchildren, all under the age of 10. Welcome, Dr. Horstmann, to this tribute to past, present presidents and trailblazers. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thanks, Jen, for allowing me to participate in this interview. I'm excited also to be here. It's really an honor to be able to discuss my service with the American Academy for Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine with you. And welcome to my home, which is outside of Philadelphia. And I pulled in some fresh flowers for you. And those, by the way, are my children sitting right there, those 6 grown daughters. So I'm excited to be here.
They're both beautiful, all 6 of your daughters over your shoulder, and the beautiful flowers that you picked. Thank you for doing that for us, and I'm thrilled to have you here. Well, why don't we start out with your early career choices. You were only the 35th woman to join with 18,000 male orthopedic surgeons when you were inducted into the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons in 1979. At the time, it was an amazing accomplishment. Why did you choose to become an orthopedic surgeon?
Well, it really suited me, probably the best of all the specialties I saw in medicine. My brain kind of works in the way that I'm a very visual person. I can see 3-dimensionally pretty much. I can see an angle. If my husband famously tells the story of the day I came home, we had had some renovations on the house. I looked at the corner of one of the things they had just done. I said, that's the wrong angle. And he's like, what? So many years later, an architect came and said, you know, that's the wrong angle there. I'm like, yes, thank you very much. It is the wrong angle, and it's bothered me every time I walk by it. But so I can see that kind of thing. So that kind of stuff is useful in doing orthopedics because you have to set kids' bones, put together fragmented femurs and other bones. And it's important to be able to see those things 3-dimensionally.
I can imagine it helps to straighten things out for sure. So how did you end up in pediatrics as a pediatric orthopedic surgeon?
I was a resident at Jefferson in Philadelphia. As part of my residency, we went down to DuPont, and now it's called Nemours, and spent a year there learning about pediatric orthopedics. That's required in all residency programs, either 6 months to a year. So when I was there, I really liked that. And I was really lucky because Dr. Dean McEwen, who was the chief there and an orthopedic surgeon, offered me a job. It's kind of, I guess, it's kind of like a first love. The first job offer is like, oh, you know, this might be for me. So that's how I ended up in pediatric orthopedics.
So I'm guessing this is going to lead me to the answer of why CP.
Yes. So when I was there, I saw those children who, by the way, are generally adorable. And I just kind of like the kids to start with. But in terms of the science of it, I saw that the orthopedic surgery that was done was just amazing in terms of changing the child's trajectory, particularly for mobility. I also, when I was there at DuPont, I also gave several papers on cerebral palsy, and then I went on to be a fellow there at DuPont Nemours, and then a staff member. And then later I went to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, with the legendary Hugh Watts.
So you did something kind of interesting that orthopedic surgeons you don't really hear about, but you took your NDT course. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I did. The neurodevelopmental therapy course was being offered in Delaware that summer. It's usually only offered in a couple of places a year. So I was a fellow. When I was a fellow, I was able to take advantage of doing that. Now, my mother was a physical therapist, so I have always had great respect for physical therapy and how we can enhance what work is done by orthopedic surgeons. So it was kind of right up my alley.
That's really cool. So you had kind of the best of both worlds. You knew how to work with the body and more of in that physical therapy sense, and then you were able to also actually change the structure of the body.
Yeah, it also seemed to me that physical therapy and all the adjunct therapies that we do in terms of taking care of kids with cerebral palsy are just so important that we're looking at the whole child and that we are using a team effort to bring the child to where we would like the child to go. It's kind of like a school that has many different areas that you can learn in.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you were interested in setting up a gait lab. Could you tell me about that a little bit?
Okay, so DuPont at that time did not have a gait lab, and Dr. McEwen kind of tasked me with going around figuring out how to put one together and what we could do. We were building a bigger hospital at that time, which was several years in the offing when I was there. But as a result of trying to learn about gait labs, I went around the country and saw different gait labs. And the first place I went to was in Newington, Connecticut, where I met Dr. Jim Gage. And I was young and single at that point. And so they had me stay overnight at their home. And I developed there, I met his wife, Mary, and we have had a lifelong friendship since then. After that, I went to see Dave Sutherland in San Diego. And when I was visiting in San Diego, Dr. Jörg Baumann from Zurich, Switzerland was there. And I met him and he talked about his lab. He was doing a lot of the research using the labs back then. So at one point I was able to go to see Dr. Baumann in Zurich, Switzerland.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that was exciting. And the other person who I met in that was Jean Black in Stanford, who is the person I ended up writing the book with. So I was fortunate to meet all these really icons of cerebral palsy management early in my career. And they have all been friends and helpful to me.
Absolutely. And they definitely seem like they mentored you early on and kind of lifted you up. And obviously, I know Dr. Black, with you working with him later on to write the book, I know we'll be talking about that as well. Did you have any other mentors?
So along the way, one person I would single out especially was Leon Root, who was at Special Surgery in New York, and he's a very wise man, and he gave me encouragement on my research and good feedback on my research, which was helpful to me. There are a few other people that I met along the way too. I mean, honestly, the whole academy is filled with people who are my friends and my mentors. But Al Scherzer was a friend and mentor early on, even though he was in a slightly different branch of medicine. He was in pediatrics, but doing basically developmental medicine. way before. He was kind of a pioneer in developmental medicine.
Yeah.
But also along the way, I met Martin Bax, who was quite a character and the editor of what we call the Red Journal, which is developmental medicine and child neurology. And later I was on the editorial board for the journal for quite a number of years. And because of that, I developed a much closer relationship with Martin Bax. And Martin Bax was followed by Peter Baxter as the journal editor. And when I wrote my book, Hillary Hart was my book editor, but I had known them before I was writing my book. And so we have forged a friendship through these many years.
I can imagine that was an amazing undertaking, and definitely would foster those friendships and use your brain in a much different way. So who were your most cherished friends or colleagues that were in the Academy?
So one very good friend was Laura Tosi of Children's National. Laura has been my long-term friend, and we had children at the same time, and we have our careers have kind of followed parallel paths. Initially we just knew each other, but then eventually we started rooming together when we were at meetings without our spouses. So we have many adventures to relate in our past history on that.
I bet it was fun.
Yeah. And I mean, the women in my orthopedic career have been wonderful. Vicki Kaling was a great scoliosis surgeon. She was educated here in Philadelphia at Temple University. And there's, of course, as minorities in orthopedic programs, we have great war tales to tell about education in Philadelphia and beyond. Okay. She then went on to work with Dr. Bleck. Okay. So she was also another person who drew me closer to knowing Dr. Bleck. Some other people I just kind of like to mention was Lynn Logan was a real leader in the Academy. She presented a lot of papers and was on the board of directors and held many leadership positions in the Academy for over many years. But one thing that she was so instrumental in that no one really knows about this, but I'm telling you now, is that she was very helpful in getting the women in the Academy to get better organized and have a larger voice in the Academy.
How did she do that?
Yeah, so I told you this story.
I want you to tell everybody the story.
So in all these organizations, it seems like everybody's got it all set up ahead of time. So they say the nominations committee, nominations are now open for the nominations committee. So the guys would stand up and say, this guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. And then somebody else would say, nominations are now closed, and there'd be no women. So that didn't seem right. So Lynn particularly, I remember, was very concerned about this, as was I. And so we got together and we'd say, we're going to name some women. And so we weren't as organized as we should have been, but we did know to sit apart from each other so that wouldn't look like this little cabal going on with the ladies in the Academy. Now, at that time, there were not the representation on the board of directors of the Academy for cerebral palsy did not include a lot of women. So Lynn and I and a few other people said, I nominate so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And just kind of, and all of a sudden the guys are like, what just happened? We got a number of women on the roster now, and that never happened before. Anyway, that was pretty.
I think it sounds like
right?
Very good planning on your part. Absolutely.
Okay, so I had lots of friends over the years who I got to know better, especially as they had leadership positions. But the late Bob Rosenthal from Boston was a great friend of mine.
Yeah.
Bill Oppenheim from LA, Don Rory from South Carolina, Bob Christopher from New York, Mike Sussman, who was originally from Charlottesville, Virginia, and then went out to Oregon, Jim Bennett from your city, great city of New Orleans. They've all been good friends through the years, and we've kind of grown older together. And I joked that they were my meeting husbands, but I got that line from Jean Black, who told me that about some lady who was, I don't know, in the academy, and he said she's my meeting wife. So that was a long time ago. I'm like, what? Anyway, all in good spirit.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
it's clear how close you all were.
Yeah, in the younger crowd, not that much younger, but in the younger crowd was Hank Chambers and Christy Bornson, and honestly, I could go on and name so many others, but including my little favorite, because I feel like I saw her from the very beginning, and she was from Minnesota, Sarah Winter, who I thought she was going to be wonderful, and she ended up being president of the academy. And so each of them have been, and all the people above have been superstars in the advancement of care for children with cerebral palsy. And then, of course, I don't want to leave out my dear friend, Charlene Butler, who was being interviewed in one of these sessions in a similar way.
She was a lot of fun to interview for sure. So as I understand it, Jim Gage nominated you to become the 4th woman president of the Academy after more than 2 decades from its last woman president. I think it was in 1970 that there was the last woman president. Can you tell us about how that happened?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things on that, and you had looked that up to find out how many women there were. And I thought that was interesting, but none of them had been orthopedic surgeons, so
no,
that's kind of different. But Jim Gage calls me up one day, I think it was a Sunday. It was probably in 1991, because these positions, you were second vice president and then first vice president and then president, so it didn't just happen overnight. So, and he asked me to be a future president. So at that time, my youngest of those 6 beautiful young children was Jane, and she was probably about 2 years old. So I'm thinking, here's what I have to do. I took a deep breath and I said yes, and no regrets on that one. It's been a great ride.
So let me get this straight. It was ages 13 to 2?
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, that was a big, deep breath, and I'm glad you did it.
Yeah.
So can you tell me some of the highlights of your presidency?
Well, my meeting was in New Orleans, your city, and it was the 48th annual meeting. And one great thing about it was that I really loved the theme of that year, which was accessing the world for people with disabilities. Now, the American Disabilities Act had been passed just a few years before, around 1990. And we were just starting to see the positive effects of that and how it truly opened up the possibilities in the world for the disabled. So it was a great topic. And I had 3 amazing guest speakers whose talks addressed that theme of accessing the world. And 2 of them were from the United Cerebral Palsy. And one of them was Al Condalucci. And Al was president of United Cerebral Palsy in Pittsburgh. And he spoke about inclusion and interdependence. He talked about in Pittsburgh, there's a hill. And that hill, so many Condaluccis live on that hill that they call it Condalucci Hill. And how it is so important that we are part of a community rather than striving for independence or isolation from other people. And certainly there's been in the past a lot of segregation and isolation of children and adults with special needs from greater society. And that's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
The second guy who spoke was John Kemp, and he was amazing. He was a lawyer who was the executive director of United Cerebral Palsy. So he was in Washington, D.C. So he was an amazing speaker, but his message was all about his life and the obstacles he's had to overcome. He had quadrilateral congenital limb deficiencies, which meant that he had 4 prostheses on, rode a wheelchair, but he's an internationally known figure for his legal advocacy for people with disabilities. I mean, quite an amazing guy. So the last person I went to, a few other people. George Rabb was my program director and did a fabulous job, and I'm so grateful for him. I just kind of called him up and said, George, would you do that? I liked the way his brain thought. He produced all the papers that seemed to me to be spot on, integrating mathematics with how to analyze the results of papers and things like that. So anyway, he was great.
And tell me about your presidential awardee. She sounds pretty cool.
Oh yeah, so I had a presidential awardee named Christine Rouse, and Christine was about 20 years old at that time, and she was a pretty great motivational speaker. She had started an organization when she was like in high school called Kids Are Kids, and here's how I got to know Christine. I knew her as my own patient, but I got to know her better. My child came home one day and said, Mom, Christine Rouse, this lady came and spoke to us today. Her name is Christine Rouse. She says she knows you. So I said, yes. I said, so she said, Mom, Christine, by the way, had cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
So she said, Mom, Christine and I have a lot in common. And I said, oh, tell me about that. And so she said, yeah, Christine and I both like pizza pie. So I thought, well, Christine's done her job. She's explained this to a bunch of children, and their take home was, about that lady who came and spoke to us? She liked pizza pie just like I do. So it's a great thing. So she has since gone on to found a theater group, and the theater group, which is in Philadelphia, is called Acting Without Boundaries. And the theater group puts together productions, and all the actors are kids with some sort of disability. So they put on their own productions, and they also put on productions with some of the local schools for dual theater production, which is great. So it's really fun to think of this. You have all these actors who have some physical limitations, but they have no acting limitations, and they are terrific. And it's a wonderful endeavor that she's done.
It sounds amazing. It's almost like reverse inclusion, and you've got this great acting troupe and individuals with disabilities, but you're right, they have no acting limitations. I can't wait to look it up. It sounds really fun. So are you willing to share some of your most embarrassing presidential moments?
Okay. Thanks for asking that one. I couldn't really even think of any, but I managed to suppress whatever were the embarrassing moments. But I really have fond memories of my presidential talk. I wove clips of the Rolling Stones song, "Can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need." So the point on that was to say that in accessing the world for persons with disabilities, we need to join forces to make that happen. And when it doesn't quite happen initially, just keep on trying in spite of the setbacks and obstacles. So unbeknownst to him, that's what Mick Jagger did that year for our cause. So this was also back in the tape days, and some of the people who might view this say, what's a tape? But anyway, there were tapes with music on them, and you put them into a tape cassette recorder or something on that order, and you start the tape and you finish the tape wherever you want. And kids would get together and they'd make mixes of tapes. And it was the big thing in the 90s. Eventually I threw out about 100 mixes that the kids had put together. Okay, but putting it together, what I wanted to do was play this song in the middle of my talk. Okay. And I wanted to play it twice. Okay. So the problem with that is I could cue it up once, but then I couldn't cue it up again for the second time. So I found a second tape player at the academy, but an academy friend went and found a second copy of the tape so that I could play the right refrain appropriately the second time. Anyway, it was quite fun. People have come up to me years and years later and said, you know, that was a great year. I kind of remember it a lot, but that talk that you gave, I remember that the most. Yes, and every time I hear that song, I think about it. So
I'm fairly certain that every time I hear that song, I'm going to think about it too now. Thank you for sharing that story. That's really cute. Well, can you tell me about some of your career highlights?
Well, you mentioned some of them when we opened up this session. I was the president of the Ruth Jackson Orthopedic Society, which was the women's orthopedic group, which when we started, there were not very many of us. And now we've grown to about 900. Anyway, we've made pushes, but overall, women orthopedic surgeons are still minorities and underrepresented. But forming an organization is very important to move that along out of the Stone Age.
Are you still involved? Are you still involved with them?
Oh, I get notices from time to time about them. If I go to an academy meeting, I go to that. I have some local friends who have been past presidents, and we get together. Okay. In fact, I have met other people who became president later, and then we've become good friends. I'm thinking of, we have several in Philadelphia. I was also the Distinguished Alumni Award recipient from my medical school, which was great, as well as my college and my high school and even grade school. So my friend from grade school says, you know, I wasn't that impressed with grade school. I mean, after all, there weren't that many of us, and what were we doing? But she did come to my medical school distinguished alumni award.
So you won medical school.
I won medical school. So how about that one? Yeah.
And you won grade school too.
There were some other smart kids there.
Pretty cool.
So mostly, I suppose, I worked hard through my career. I did a lot of emergency surgery, which actually is quite fun. And that's a terrible thing to say, but it is fun. And I had a lot of grateful patients. So I had a great career.
I can imagine. How would you like to be remembered?
I think as an advocate and a role model to women, especially, and a mentor and supporter for women orthopedic surgeons and women physicians in general. I taught a lot of medical students over the years, and encouraged them to go into specialties that they might not have thought about going into, that were less populated by women. Mm-hmm. I think over the years, it's also important to know that I was a role model probably to the men who I trained, who saw that I participate in my family, and therefore they could participate in their family. I think from a generation ago, or maybe 2 generations ago, hopefully, a lot of men said, you know, I'm the doctor in the family, and therefore, you know, I won't be doing dinner. You can pick the kids up at basketball. You want to take care of the elderly parents, that would be your job, and dismiss themselves from their family involvement. So I hope I've made I've been a role model to that type of thought process, to avoid that type of thought process.
Wow. That's an interesting point, and very important for a lot of women and families, for sure.
Well, in terms of my surgery, I was pretty thoughtful and meticulous, and I always used the smallest incisions I could, kind of keyhole incisions, and closed things cosmetically. with what we call subcuticular closure. Now they would use more of a glue on the skin. But my residents always complained that this took too long. And I'm like, you know what? It's an extra 12 minutes, but for this child and this adult, this is the rest of their life. They're looking at that scar. I thought that was important. I'd say in each aspect of my life, I would like to be remembered as a loving, nurturing, caring person. So I'm just going to give you a little example of how I ended up choosing medicine and then orthopedics, then pediatric orthopedics. But when I was young, I tried out for the Olympics in swimming, and I was good. I made the finals, but of the Olympic trials, but no, I did not make the team. So I wasn't poised with the conundrum, how am I going to spend the rest of my life being a competitive swimmer? I knew I had other things to do, but I also knew that if I swam up and down that pool a little bit quicker the next time, really the world is not better for that. So I said, what is it that I want to do in life? And I suppose I like to see that I would go out each day to work, and I would do something that would benefit others. And I guess I'm a short-termer in terms of wanting to see something I've done today that makes the world a little bit better. And so that's what medicine is all about in many ways. So I wanted to create a better footprint around me. So that's kind of where I've spent my life. So I do have the 6 daughters, as you know, and they are grateful actually that I gave them some example. So I am blessed with that.
And we are blessed that you did not win the Olympics and you won medical school and you won high school and college. So what are you most proud of?
In my career, I've got to say, without hesitation, my book, the book I wrote with Jean Bleck on orthopedic management and cerebral palsy, had been the classic book, but it had been published 20 years earlier, was much harder than I imagined it would be to do the update on it. And I went all over the city of Philadelphia to all the medical libraries. And by the way, there are 5 or 6 of them, check on references and update the science. There was a lot of correspondence back and forth from different surgeons in the US mostly. And it got me in touch with some of them, like Scott Mubarak, I'm thinking of, who had these wonderful papers and illustrations that were so important to include in the book. But I also corresponded with basic scientists, and updating the basic science on this beyond the orthopedic surgery bubble was very challenging and a great thing. And there are several chapters in our book on basic science, so that was important, but took a long time.
Seems like an amazing accomplishment.
Here is my book.
How thick is it?
It's big. It's 425 pages or something.
Wow.
And through all these Zoom calls all year long, I've had all these different books that have been propping up my computer when I go on the Zoom call. Like I've got The Sensual Garden, things all about gardens. Garden Lost, Great Houses of Summit Avenue in St. Paul. But this, I actually don't put that as to prop up my computer. I have this on a bookshelf. And what's fun about this particular edition that I have is that I have so many signatures from great people. The book came out as I was in San Francisco and at an academy meeting. And so I got all these people to sign it right then and there. It was terrific, including Dr. Black, of course.
And he was there. He was at Stanford.
Yes.
So
yes,
that's great.
Anyway, that was a fun piece of writing a book, is that you get to bring it out, and it was a great adventure. We had a party there. It was just, and people oohed and nod.
So cool.
It was fun. Yes.
So how do you think the field has changed, for better or for worse?
Oh, the field has changed definitely for better. We have made great strides in prevention, especially to avoid having children with handicaps have it when they don't need to have it. So the prevention is very important. The neonatal care is very important. There's been great strides in what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in physical therapy, in pharmaceutical management, and in technology, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
The science in orthopedics, I think it's greatly enhanced through these gait labs, which we now have been using since I was a young person, and now are gaining much more to be much better accepted. Scoliosis technology has really improved. Before we put kids in casts, we don't do that anymore. The outcomes are much better. The morbidity is better because we're getting kids up and moving, and they're not getting pulmonary embolus. They're not having huge blood loss with the scoliosis surgery.
Wow.
Many other areas have contributed to major improvements for children in this field, for children with some kind of handicap,
Yeah.
especially around communication, with use of phones and things like that. You have home technology like lighting, answering the door, using the phone, etc., that are easily adaptable and used by kids with disabilities, and used by everybody, obviously. But that technology has, it flows both ways. In terms of mobility, we now have lighter wheelchairs, power wheelchairs, especially because the power batteries themselves have gotten smaller and lighter. That technology, is being used obviously in cars and other things. You see many more scooters now than you did many years ago.
Yeah.
Just because it's part of society, really. And in the home, we have things to help us out. And room of vacuum. I don't expect my children with cerebral palsy touch a vacuum anyway, because I know that children do not touch vacuums at all under any circumstances. But maybe as you got older and you were living your life somewhat more independently, you get that room of vacuum to just do a little grunt work on its own.
Exactly.
I think the mainstreaming of kids has been so important also for their social development. I mean, if you think of this past year when we've had COVID and kids were forced to stay at home and not socialize, there's a big detriment to that. That's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
Certainly my children have been exposed to children in wheelchairs, and it's everybody's positivity to get to know kids, as my presidential awardee says, kids are kids, and that's important.
Absolutely.
Then there are other small things that, you're asking, what has improved in the field, but simple things like curb cuts really just came when the ADA Act came through. There are ramps, and we have low friction and lightweight wheelchairs now. There's been clothing changes that just have revolutionized things. No more tying your sneakers up, because now people are all using Velcro, and it's not just kids with disabilities, it's everybody, so that mom doesn't have to spend 10 minutes getting everybody into their clothes in the morning.
Yeah, it seems like mainstream changes that actually benefited people with disabilities. Almost in a way, it trickled down to disabilities.
Yes.
But it's benefited us all for sure.
Yeah, when I saw Dr. Gage in Newington, Connecticut, so many years ago. His gait lab was sponsored by United Technologies. United Technologies was interested in setting up a gait lab because they were interested in creating better robotics. And it was through analysis of human motion that they were able to do that. And that's why they subsidized it. So yes, there's a cross-fertilization here,
Right.
which benefits United Technologies and kids with cerebral palsy and kids with spina bifida, all kinds of things.
That makes a lot of sense. So what's your vision for the Academy?
So I think this is such a unique academy because it is interdisciplinary. You know, in medicine particularly, we tend to live in little silos where I'm really good at cerebral palsy, or I'm really good at ankle fractures, or I'm good at something or other, but we don't have this. Generally, you have your specialty, you're great at that. You do a spectrum of things in generally, but you don't really know necessarily what the person down the hallway is doing in the GI clinic. So what's so interesting about the academy is you can come there and learn what is happening in gastroenterology that would benefit your child with cerebral palsy. I think it's the whole premise of making it interdisciplinary is just so important. And in putting together papers that and encouraging papers that create the science, follow the science, and educates clinicians based on that.
Yeah, good point.
So one area that we have been so strong on is international outreach. And for many years, especially through the work that Lou Diaz did, we shared our meeting with internationally with another organization. And in that case, I think it was in Brazil. And we have done that around the world. And now I think that we are more familiar with what we can get out of Zoom meetings and how we can collectively have electronic meetings. I think that the Academy is particularly poised to take advantage of that and to set the pace on it too. And there's a lot of other things that the Academy is so great on, which again are out of the medical model. Yeah. Adapted sports, family forums, transitioning to adulthood for pediatric onset conditions, and other areas that most medical organizations just don't begin to touch.
Yeah.
It's treating the whole patient, I think, has been the concept in my practice. When I came to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, I worked on putting back together the cerebral palsy clinic, which has gone strong since that time. Which is again the way to look at it, because your child doesn't need just orthopedic surgery. They need seating, they need the occupational therapist and the physical therapist, and whoever it is that is doing the developmental pediatrician who's doing perhaps the Botox injections and things like that.
And the family doesn't want to go to 5 separate appointments. That being able to go and see everybody in one fell swoop makes it a lot easier and much more family-centered, and everybody can have that conversation and make decisions together. Makes all the sense in the world.
Right, and when that doesn't happen, then you're sending records back and forth, and something which could be decided upon in one day ends up happening over 6 months, and 6 months is a long time in the life of a child. So.
Exactly.
But moving forward, we will continue to use our academic papers with lots of quantitative evaluations as to outcomes, as I'm sure Charlene Butler has expounded upon in her interview. One last thing I'd like to say about that in terms of the Academy is developmental medicine is a relatively new specialty, and this was the perfect home for the Academy, and probably why developmental medicine in some ways was able to develop is because there was a home that kind of encompassed what the clinicians and pediatricians who were involved in developmental medicine saw as what their role is. And that process is really, when you have a child and you're newly diagnosed with a challenging problem, medical issue, this is, where do you start? And the people who attend this academy know where to start for a kid, whether it's the orthopedic surgeon or it's the developmental medicine. We're equipped to say, okay, this is what you have to do, and who do you have to see, and how do you have to research this further, and what does the future hold for your child and for your family? So
yeah, absolutely. And do you have advice for current members?
Well, the academy is so great, isn't it? So I would say, looking back, as I said, I have made friends with just all the giants in this field. And the only way that could have happened was by joining the AACPDM. It's a resource. I think when you're a young clinician, you go and you're hired to another position, and all of a sudden you find out you're the best in this subject in your hospital, or maybe in your city or your community. So your academy colleagues are the resources that you can go to over and over again to say, hey, listen, I've got this patient, this is kind of unique and this and that, and get, with 3 small phone calls, get lots of advice on what their thoughts would be on this. So you can make that a connection through the academy. So take advantage of that. The second thing I'd say is the academy leadership is a great way is important to you as a clinician, and to get involved with that. It's not that hard. You volunteer for a committee as a starter, getting on some of the board activity. It's an important aspect of any member's professional development. You've got to get outside your institution and go beyond the silo of your personal knowledge. You know this much in what that child needs, and the academy affords you an ability to know this much in a relatively short amount of time.
You retired a couple of years ago, or you claim to be retired. I know that's not the truth, because of all the things that you're doing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your life after your retirement from medicine?
Well, I'm going to say that there's so much more to life than your job or your career. And so I will say that I'm lucky to have good health so that I can continue doing some things in life. So I am currently the chair of the Philadelphia Flower Show. If you've never been there, you need to go there because it's a terrific, wonderful thing. But I just love that job. It's just been fun beyond belief, but it's so exciting. It's to know exactly how the whole flower show is put together. It's kind of like being able to pull back the curtain of a circus to say, how do you put this all together? So anyway, so that is what I'm doing a lot of now. Of course, I have now more time to enjoy some of the things that I wasn't able to spend as much time on: my husband, my children, and my grandchildren, and of course the garden. So I can, I guess, finally stop and smell the flowers. Absolutely. Although I'm going to say, I was taking somebody around and showing them my garden. She said, so do you just sit here on the bench and enjoy this wonderful sight? I'm like, well, I spend about 8 to 10 hours a week kind of making this a wonderful sight, but you know what? I don't spend 8 to 10 hours sitting on the bench, but maybe I should think more about doing that. So I am able to enjoy that more.
You should try. What gives you hope?
Oh, lots of things, but mostly the unlimited goodness of people. It's amazing. People are wonderful. And honestly, you know, a wonderful thing about pediatric orthopedics and about the academy and working with children with disabilities and families with children is it just brings up the best, and they're the best people in the world. So it's a great thing.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Do you have anything else to add?
Oh, just thanks for interviewing me, Jen. I probably would have never gotten around to saying any of these things had you not prompted me to do that. I'm grateful to the Academy that I was able to participate in their leadership. And I wish the Academy members the best. I hope to see you at the next Academy meeting. If not, maybe we meet again at the Philadelphia Flower Show. And I'll just say one last thing I will say is, as our Academy members forge on and find the important stuff in their life, is just remember Mick Jagger's words: if you try sometime, you just might find and get what you need.